Imagine boarding a plane knowing it would be your last flight. That's exactly what Johnny Horton told his wife on November 4th, 1960. Hours later, his car was struck head-on by a drunk driver. But here's the twist. Horton wasn't the only country star with a deadly premonition. From mysterious fires destroying priceless recordings to vanishing diaries and suspicious deaths, the golden age of country music holds some of the darkest secrets in music history. And one of these mysteries might finally be solved. After more than 50 years of silence. The year was 1968, and Red Foley had just finished what would be his final performance at a small club in Fort Wayne, Indiana. The man who brought country music to national television through Ozark Jubilee was found dead in his sleep just hours later. At least that's the official story. Foley was more than just another country star. His groundbreaking hit Peace in the Valley sold over 1 million copies, making him the first country artist to achieve gold record status on a gospel song. By blending country, gospel, and blues, he helped build the foundation for rockabilly and early rock and roll. Even Elvis Presley cited him as a major influence, often performing Foley's songs in his early concerts. The path to stardom wasn't easy for Foley. Born in rural Kentucky, he spent years performing on local radio stations before getting his big break. His distinctive voice and natural charm made him a favorite among listeners. And by the 1940s, he was one of the most recognizable voices in country music. His television show, Ozark Jubilee, brought country music into American living rooms every Saturday night, making him a household name. But success came with a heavy price. Behind Foley's warm smile and charismatic stage presence lay a man wrestling with mounting pressures. Financial troubles plagued him throughout the 1960s, and whispers of industry strong-arming began to surface. Some say he was being forced to perform despite declining health, while others point to mysterious phone calls he received in the weeks before his death. The official cause was listed as respiratory failure, but those close to him questioned the hastiness of this conclusion. His daughter claimed he had been in good spirits that night, even planning future performances. The club owner reported seeing Foley in an intense discussion with two unidentified men after the show. When pressed for details, the owner suddenly couldn't remember anything about their appearance. What makes this mystery even more compelling is what happened to Foley's personal documents. His performance contracts, diary, and private correspondence from those final months vanished. The only remaining record is a partially damaged audio recording of his last show, where he can be heard saying something curious during a break between songs. Some things in this business you just can't fight. Adding to the intrigue, several musicians who performed with Foley that night later reported unusual occurrences. The piano player remembered Foley receiving a note during his performance that visibly shook him. His longtime guitarist claimed Foley pulled him aside after the show and tried to tell him something important, but they were interrupted by the same unidentified men the club owner had seen. Even more puzzling were the discrepancies in the medical examiner's report. While respiratory failure was listed as the cause of death, several pages from the original report went missing. A nurse who worked at the hospital that night later told researchers she remembered something odd about the situation, but before she could elaborate, she relocated to another state and was never heard from again. We might never know what really happened that night in Fort Wayne, but Foley's death marked a turning point in how the country music industry treated its artists. Questions about his passing led to increased scrutiny of performance schedules and artist management practices. The mystery surrounding his final hours forced the industry to confront its darker side. Speaking of mysterious disappearances, one of country music's most celebrated performers would soon face an equally puzzling loss. When Hank Snow's private recordings vanished in the 1970s, they took with them secrets that could have rewritten country music history. Hank Snow was known as the Singing Ranger, a fitting title for a man whose music roamed far beyond Nashville's borders. His hit, I'm Moving On, spent an unprecedented 21 weeks at #1, making him one of country music's most influential stars. But in the 1970s, something happened that would leave fans and historians questioning everything they knew about his career. Deep in the heart of Nashville, a storage facility housed Snow's personal archive. Decades of unreleased recordings, handwritten lyrics, and personal journals documenting the evolution of country music. These weren't just any recordings. Snow was known for experimenting with sounds that were years ahead of their time. blending traditional country with elements that wouldn't become mainstream until decades later. One summer morning in 1973, a routine transfer of these materials between recording studios went horribly wrong. The entire collection, over 30 years of musical history, vanished without a trace. The truck carrying the archives was found abandoned at a rest stop outside Memphis, the driver nowhere to be found. When questioned later, he claimed to have no memory of what happened during those missing hours. Industry insiders whispered about rival labels wanting to suppress Snow's innovative sound. Others pointed to more personal motives. Snow had been working on an autobiography, and rumors suggested his journals contained explosive revelations about some of country music's biggest names. The timing was suspicious. Just weeks before the disappearance, Snow had announced plans to release a series of albums featuring his experimental work from the 1950s. Snow's own reaction to the loss only deepened the mystery. In public, he appeared surprisingly calm, but close friends reported he seemed almost relieved, as if a weight had been lifted. When pressed about the contents of his journals, he would only say, "Some stories aren't meant to be told until everyone involved is long gone." Decades later, fragments of the mystery continue to emerge. In 2019, a flea market vendor in Kentucky found an unmarked reel-to-reel tape that audio experts confirmed contained Snow's voice. The recording captured him working on an unknown song that seemed to blend traditional country with what could only be described as early psychedelic elements. Before researchers could fully analyze the tape, it disappeared from a locked university archive. Speaking of mysterious disappearances, the story of Cowboy Copa's final flight would leave behind even more questions than answers. March 5th, 1963. A clear day turned deadly when a small Piper Comanche aircraft plunged from the Tennessee sky, taking the lives of 4 country music stars. While history remembers this as the crash that claimed Patsy Cline, another story remains largely untold, that of Lloyd Cowboy Copas and the eerie warnings that preceded his final flight. Copas had climbed the charts with hits like Alabama and Signed, Sealed, and Delivered, becoming one of the Grand Ole Opry's most reliable draws. But in the weeks leading up to that fateful March day, the typically cheerful performer had grown uncharacteristically anxious about traveling. His wife would later reveal that he'd been having recurring nightmares about a plane falling through clouds. The morning of the crash, Copas nearly backed out of the flight. Fellow performers recalled him pacing the airport terminal, making multiple phone calls to his wife. He even offered to buy Randy Hughes, the pilot's bus ticket if they'd drive instead. But with another show scheduled just hours away, the group decided to brave the deteriorating weather conditions. What makes this tragedy even more compelling are the details that emerged afterward. The airport's weather station had issued warnings about turbulent conditions, but these reports mysteriously never reached the pilot. A local resident reported seeing the plane flying unusually low, making strange maneuvers as if searching for something in the gathering storm. Most puzzling was what investigators found in the wreckage. Copa's pocket watch had stopped at 6:20 p.m., exactly the time he had repeatedly mentioned in his anxiety-filled conversations that morning. A page torn from his date book was found clutched in his hand, containing a hastily scrawled message that has never been fully deciphered. The crash changed country music forever, but questions linger about what really happened in those final moments. Why did an experienced pilot like Randy Hughes decide to fly into deteriorating weather? What made Copas so certain something would go wrong? And why did initial reports of the crash site's location keep changing in the hours after the tragedy? The mystery deepened when other country stars began sharing their own stories of premonitions and close calls with aircraft, experiences they'd kept quiet until Copas's fears proved tragically prophetic. Even more unsettling was how this crash seemed to foreshadow another aviation incident that would claim more country music lives just a few years later. But before that tragedy would unfold, another mysterious fire would threaten to erase the legacy of country music's founding father. The strange case of Jimmie Rodgers' lost recordings was about to begin. Before there was country music as we know it, there was Jimmie Rodgers. Known as the father of country music, the singing brakeman laid down the blueprints for an entire genre. But in the late 1930s, a suspicious fire nearly erased his legacy forever. The Victor recording studios in Camden, New Jersey housed something precious. Rogers' original master recordings, along with notebooks full of unreleased lyrics and musical notations. These weren't just any papers. They included detailed notes about his unique yodeling technique, songs he'd written but never recorded, and perhaps most importantly, his personal accounts of how he developed the blue yodel that would influence generations of musicians. On a quiet Sunday evening in 1939, when the studio should have been empty, smoke began pouring from the building's windows. By the time firefighters arrived, the section containing Rogers' materials was completely engulfed. Strangely, the fire had somehow bypassed other valuable recordings stored nearby. The timing raised eyebrows. Just days before, Victor Records had been approached by a rival company interested in purchasing Rogers' catalog. When the offer was declined, witnesses reported seeing unfamiliar men examining the building's exterior. The studio's night watchman, who normally patrolled that area religiously, was mysteriously reassigned to a different section that evening. Insurance investigators found traces of accelerant near where Rogers' masters were stored. Even more puzzling, several of his most valuable recordings had been moved from their usual storage location just hours before the fire. The employee responsible for the move had no record of authorization for the transfer and disappeared shortly after being questioned. What survived tells its own story. Among the charred debris, investigators found a partially burned notebook. Inside was a cryptic message in Rogers' handwriting. "They'll try to take it all, but the music remembers." The meaning of these words remains a mystery, but some believe Rogers had anticipated attempts to control or suppress his musical innovations. The fire's impact went beyond lost recordings. It sparked a decades-long debate about music preservation and artists' rights. Some argue the fire wasn't meant to destroy Rogers' work, but rather to cover up evidence of something hidden in his personal papers. Perhaps details about the early music industry that someone wanted to keep buried. While Rogers' hit recordings survived in other formats, the fire took with it countless unreleased songs and the secrets of his pioneering techniques. But he wasn't the only early country star whose success carried mysterious undertones. The story of the Carter family's rise to fame would reveal another shadowy figure pulling strings behind the scenes. The Carter family revolutionized country music with their haunting harmonies and timeless songs like Wildwood Flower. But behind their meteoric rise lies one of country music's most enduring mysteries: the identity of the wealthy stranger who secretly bankrolled their early career. In 1927, A.P. Carter, his wife Sarah, and sister-in-law Maybelle made their way to Bristol, Tennessee, for what would become known as the Big Bang of country music. Ralph Peer, a Victor Records talent scout, had placed newspaper ads seeking local musicians. The Carters arrived nearly broke, their old car barely making the journey. Yet somehow they appeared with new instruments, professional quality performance clothes, and enough money for an extended stay. Years later, Maybelle Carter revealed a curious detail. An unknown man had approached them weeks before, insisting they attend the Bristol sessions. He provided them with cash, equipment, and specific instructions about which songs to perform. More intriguingly, this same figure continued supporting them financially through their early recording years, always working through intermediaries and never revealing his identity. Hotel registers from the period show rooms for the Carters were consistently paid for by a Mr. Smith, a name that appears nowhere else in Bristol's records from that time. Bank records revealed regular deposits into A.P. Carter's account from a Nashville holding company that dissolved immediately after the Carters achieved mainstream success. Some believe the mystery patron was a music industry insider plotting to commercialize mountain music. Others whispered about old money from Bristol's mining industry, seeking to preserve traditional Appalachian culture. The most intriguing theory suggests he was connected to Sarah Carter's family, explaining why the support ended around the time she and A.P. separated. The few who claimed to have met this benefactor gave conflicting descriptions. A hotel clerk remembered a tall man in expensive suits who spoke with a northern accent. A local musician recalled someone entirely different, a shorter, older man who knew an unusual amount about traditional mountain ballads. The only consistent detail was that he wore a distinctive ring with a blue stone. In their later years, both Sarah and Maybelle deflected questions about this period, though A.P. occasionally hinted at debts that can't be repaid with money. Shortly before his death, he added a curious codicil to his will, stipulating that a particular sealed envelope should be opened 50 years after his passing. When the time came in 2010, the envelope was empty except for a bluestone ring. This tale of hidden support and secret identities wasn't the only mystery surrounding country music's first family. Just as puzzling was the strange disappearance of Hawkshaw Hawkins' personal diary after his tragic death. Standing 6 feet 5 inches tall, Hawkshaw Hawkins towered over most country performers of his era. His voice, as deep and resonant as his physical presence, earned him hits like Lonesome 77203. But after his death in the same plane crash that claimed Patsy Cline and Cowboy Copas, another piece of country music history vanished: his personal diary. Unlike many country stars of his era, Hawkins meticulously documented his daily life. His leather-bound journal traveled with him everywhere, filled with song ideas, personal observations, and detailed accounts of life in the country music industry of the 1950s and early 60s. Close friends said he wrote about everything from backstage drama at the Grand Ole Opry to his concerns about changes in the music business. The diary was last seen in Hawkins' dressing room at a Kansas City performance venue just days before the crash. When his wife, Jean Shepard, went to collect his personal effects afterward, the journal had vanished. The venue's staff had no explanation for its disappearance, and no one admitted to seeing anyone enter or leave his dressing room. What makes this mystery particularly compelling was Hawkins' final entry, partially quoted in a newspaper article published shortly before the diary disappeared. He wrote about a heated conversation he'd overheard between two music executives, discussing plans that would change country music forever. The rest of the entry, according to those who saw it, contained names and details that could have exposed major industry secrets. Adding to the intrigue, several pages had been torn from the diary's back section just weeks before Hawkins' death. His road manager recalled Hawkins being unusually agitated after discovering the missing pages, saying only that some things are better left unwritten. These pages were never found, and their contents remain unknown. In the years following his death, multiple people claimed to have purchased the diary at estate sales or discovered it in attics. But none of these claims proved genuine. One collector insisted he had authentic pages from the journal, but before experts could verify them, his house was mysteriously burglarized, with only these pages taken. Jean Shepard maintained until her death that certain people in Nashville's music industry knew exactly what happened to the diary, but were sworn to secrecy. She often pointed to a sudden change in attitude from several industry executives after Hawkins' death, suggesting they seemed relieved about something. While the diary's location remains unknown, its disappearance connects to another mystery involving lost music: the case of Lefty Frizzell's final, unfinished song. Lefty Frizzell shaped the sound of country music with his innovative vocal style, influencing everyone from Willie Nelson to Merle Haggard. But his final creation became one of country music's most tantalizing lost treasures, a song that vanished the day he died. In the summer of 1975, despite declining health, Frizzell had been working obsessively on what he called his legacy song. His producer, Don Pierce, described hearing fragments of the melody during late-night phone calls. "This is the one they'll remember," Frizzell kept saying. "This changes everything." The night before his death, Frizzell called several friends to his home studio. Witnesses described an elaborate new song structure, unlike anything he'd done before. Session musician Pete Drake recalled seeing pages of complex lyrics and chord arrangements scattered across Frizzell's desk. But when police arrived the next day to investigate his death, every trace of the song had vanished. Some believe Frizzell himself destroyed the song in a moment of doubt. Others point to a more suspicious chain of events. A cleaning service visited the house just hours after his death was discovered, hired by an unknown party. When family members arrived later that afternoon, Frizzell's entire home studio had been mysteriously tidied, with all his recent work nowhere to be found. A cassette tape labeled New Song Final Version was logged in the initial police inventory, but disappeared before family members could claim it. The officer who wrote down its existence was later transferred to another district and claimed no memory of the tape when questioned years later. Most intriguing was the testimony of Frizzell's neighbor, who reported seeing lights in his studio at 3 a.m. the night he died. She described two men carrying what looked like papers and recording equipment to a dark-colored car. When she mentioned this to investigators, they allegedly told her to forget what she'd seen. Various fragments of the song have surfaced over the years. A bartender in Texas claimed Frizzle hummed the chorus to him just days before his death, describing it as a sound that would break your heart and heal it at the same time. A partial lyric sheet appeared at a Nashville auction in 1986, but was quickly bought by an anonymous bidder before anyone could document its contents. The loss of Frizzle's final song remains a wound in country music history, but it wasn't the only premonition of tragedy in the genre. Johnny Horton's mysterious forewarning of his own death would add another chilling chapter to country's collection of supernatural tales. Johnny Horton revolutionized country music by bringing historical narratives to life with hits like The Battle of New Orleans and Sink the Bismarck. But his greatest story might be how he predicted his own death with chilling accuracy. Throughout 1960, Horton began telling friends and family that he wouldn't live to see the year end. These weren't vague feelings of doom. He described specific details. He told his wife, Billie Jean, who had previously been married to Hank Williams, that he would die in a car crash caused by a drunk driver. He even specified it would happen on a bridge. On November 4th, 1960, before leaving for a performance at the Skyline Club in Austin, Texas, ironically the last venue where Hank Williams had performed, Horton tried to cancel the show. He called his wife multiple times, describing an overwhelming sense of dread. Band members recall him saying, "This is my last night on earth." After the performance, despite friends offering him a ride, Horton insisted on driving his white 1959 Cadillac back to Shreveport, Louisiana. In the early hours of November 5th, a pickup truck driven by a drunk driver struck Horton's car head-on a bridge near Milano, Texas. The man behind the wheel had been arrested for drunk driving just weeks before. But the premonition wasn't the only mysterious aspect of Horton's death. The truck driver survived but claimed no memory of the crash. Police reports noted unusual skid mark patterns that didn't match either vehicle's position. Most puzzling was the discovery of a handwritten note in Horton's pocket with the exact time and location of the crash, written in what appeared to be his handwriting. Horton had also made several cryptic statements about the music industry in his final weeks. He spoke of dangerous changes coming to country music and claimed certain people wanted to stop him from recording his next planned album, a collection of songs he described as too real for radio. The Skyline Club's sound engineer recorded Horton's final performance, but the tape disappeared the same night. Years later, a fragment surfaced containing Horton's last words to the audience. "Sometimes knowing what's coming doesn't mean you can stop it." These eerie predictions weren't isolated incidents in country music. Another legend, Bob Wills, was about to uncover something in the industry that would lead to one of its most controversial legal battles. Bob Wills didn't just create Western swing, he built an empire with it. The Texas Playboys revolutionized country music by blending jazz, blues, and country into something entirely new. But by the 1960s, Wills found himself entangled in a web of mysterious legal battles that remain sealed to this day. At the height of his career, Wills discovered something in his recording contracts that sent shockwaves through his organization. During a 1960 meeting with his lawyers, he reportedly slammed his fist on a desk and declared, "They've been stealing from all of us for years." Within days, he began quietly gathering documents and meeting with other artists. Court records show Wills filed multiple lawsuits against record labels, publishing companies, and several unnamed defendants. But before these cases could go to trial, something strange happened. Every single file was suddenly sealed by judicial order. The judges who ordered the sealing coincidentally retired shortly after, moving to different states. Even more puzzling were the series of break-ins that followed. Wills's office was burglarized 3 times, but nothing of obvious value was taken. His lawyer's car was stolen and found burned, with only the case files missing. When asked about these incidents years later, Wills would only say, "Some people will do anything to keep their secrets buried." Industry insiders whispered about a massive royalty scheme that reached the highest levels of the music business. Others suggested Wills had uncovered evidence of organized crime's influence in country music. The truth remained locked away in sealed court documents, which wouldn't be opened until 2025. Wills's health declined rapidly during this period, leading some to question whether stress from the legal battles contributed to his deterioration. Before his death in 1975, he managed to record one final message. "The truth about country music isn't in the songs we played. It's in the songs they wouldn't let us play." Today, these 9 mysteries from country music's golden age remain largely unsolved. From Red Foley's suspicious death to Hank Snow's vanished archives, from Hawkshaw Hawkins' missing diary to Bob Wills' sealed court files. Each story reveals a darker side to country music's glittering history. But perhaps the biggest mystery is how many more secrets remain buried in Nashville's past. As Johnny Horton once said in his final interview, "In country music, the truth is always there. You just have to listen between the notes." So what happened to that mysterious flea market tape with Hank Snow's lost recordings? Some say it ended up in a private collection in Kentucky. Others believe it found its way to Johnny Horton's family. But last month, a Nashville auction house listed an unmarked reel-to-reel tape with a fascinating description: "Property of Hank Snow. Warning, contents may change country music history." The starting bid? Same as that club cover charge the night Red Foley died. Exactly $13.50.